Hi everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. So let's continue the previous tutorial. And here it is. As you can see, we have added subdivide node, and we have connected it to group input, and we have created this tree of geometry nodes. The next node that I want to talk about is the point scale node. Now let's change the scale of our icospheres. No, not icospheres. I'm just gonna be using the torus shown here. I have applied a point instance and I tried to subdivide it. Here I used the mesh plane. There is a node for that too. Let's add a point scale node. So just press Shift A, go over this geometry node editor, then Shift A, go over here, then so let's type in point, then point, or you can go over point scale node, point scale, just point scale. And here it is, point scale node. So slot it right after our subdivide node as shown here. Drag it and slot it right. Additionally, you can search for nodes without needing to know where to find them. When you press Shift A, as you can see in our example, to bring up the nodes menu, click on the search option at the top and type in the name of the node you are looking for as shown here. Or also you can hover over one of these elements in order to these categories in order to choose whatever you want of these nodes. You can notice that on the point scale as shown here, you have access to 3 different numbers, x, y, and z. This is called a vector. This is called a vector as shown here. The type is vector as it's set of 3 numbers. Change one of the numbers by clicking on it and dragging sideways as shown here. And you can notice that you have some change in our geometry. You will see how the scale of your icospheres changes according to the axis. So for example like this. And drag the slider on the z-axis as shown here. For example, you can create the Audi logo. It looks and that looks very amazing. So let's change the type setting from vector to float. We have over there. So let's Ctrl Z to undo what I have changed. So Ctrl Z. Shown in our example, so let's try to change it to float, and it's gonna be showing up this factor. Take it to this factor. So click on the drop down menu next to the type and select float as I mentioned in our example. Now you only have one number to change, which will scale your icospheres uniformly using a uniform method or a uniform manner. Click and drag the factor value to adjust the size of the instance. For now, set it to any size you like. And this is very amazing. Look at this. What you have got over this panel and doing some settings and trying to play around with the value of this factor. So we have noticed the scale of our instance objects using the point scale node. In the next section, we will look at the different types of HRPs available on geometry nodes. So let's go forward. So let's talk just a little bit about different types of attributes. So let's take a moment to look at the different types of attributes and the data types that we see. So Shift A is gonna be showing this attribute category, and we have many different elements in this attribute. So let's continue. I want to show you something very interesting depending on mathematical approaches. And you should know and understand what I want to talk about in our video. So just to have many kinds, and you can classify it into different, I don't know, 4 or 5 categories or something like that. In our example, just I have selected this node, which is called attribute fill. So we have integer, or I think I'm wrong. I try to pronounce it. So an integer is a number that can be written without fractional component. Just to have this category, so many different like boolean, color, vector, integer. I'm talking about integer. An integer is a number that can be written without fractional components. So let's go to the second, which is float. Float is a floating point number, which means it is a number that has a decimal place. So just it's over there, a float. Here we have a floating point value. We should define some terms, and we should define some terms in order to understand what I'm talking about. So a vector. We have here vector, the vector with floating point values. A vector is a set of 3 float numbers and is mostly used to calculate a position in a word space. Also, we have boolean. Boolean only has 2 values and can be used for something that's either true or false. So what we have over there, I think that's it. Just we should define what is attribute. Attribute, this is a text field to input an attribute name. The most commonly used attributes are position, scale, and rotation. These are all vector-based, as they consist of 3 numbers which each correspond to the 3 axes of x, y, and z. However, there are also a few others that we will look at in later tutorials. I hope you find this tutorial useful. Let's try to make some settings and drag over some sliders like this. Is gonna be adding much more geometry and adding much more vertices, and each vertex is represented by a torus. For example, you can also make much more. This factor is gonna be changing the point scale. Like this. Now let's move to the next node, which is the point rotate node. Let's look at how we can rotate our objects. We have a torus over there. To do this, we will need a new node called point rotate. Let's add it to our tree. So go over the geometry node editor, then hit Shift A and select go over points category, then search for point rotate, click on it, then drag. You can use the search function, add this node to the right hand side of the point scale, and this is the right hand side of the point scale node. Click on it to connect it to these 2 slots. Your node tree should now look like this. In this example, we see that the point rotate node uses a vector. So go over some details in this node, and there's gonna be showing the rotation along different axes. Around the different axes. And this node uses a vector data type because you can rotate using the different x, y, and z axes. Click and drag the values next to the different axes to see how your ecospheres rotate. And there is what you have. So just drag like this, is gonna be making it rotating around the x-axis of all these objects. Also, let's see what we have over here. Please note that the difference between object and point. While point, we rotate every point in its local space as specified by its rotation attribute. So you can rotate it around the y-axis, and there is the angle of rotation also around the z-axis if you want, and this is what you have created. This time, let's go ahead to show you another node, and that node will help you to translate and drag and change the position of your objects in the 3D scene. The node is called Point Translate node. Next, let's take a look at how to change the position of our objects. For this, we need the Point Translate node. Let's add it now after our Point Rotate node. Here we have a Point Rotate node, add it over here. Press Shift A, go over Geometry Nodes Editor, then hit Shift A. Go over Point as usual in order to show up this drop down menu, and go to search for Point Translate. It's translation, or use the search function again. As I mentioned earlier, we see that it uses a vector as we can translate in either X, Y, or Z. Click on it. Then drag it over there in between Point Rotate and the Point Instance nodes. So let's set this node. Drag the values next to X, Y, Z. It's gonna be translating like this. It's gonna be translating our objects created earlier as like this. You can translate also to see all of your icospheres moving along that axis. And the node tree should look like this. Just you can split just like this. You can split over there in order to show you all the nodes that I have created. Then let's see what we have over here in our scene, and that's great. In this tutorial we have collected and we have connected all these nodes, these geometry nodes: subdivide node, point scale node, point rotate node, point translate, point instance. All these nodes are very important, and you can understand what I have talked about at the beginning of this tutorial, because you need all these nodes: subdivision, and also point scale in order to scale objects, also point rotate, rotation, and the change in position, translation along different axes, and point instance to add many different objects to make object instance. Thanks for watching, because the next tutorial is about attribute and randomize node, which is much more complicated. I will add some nodes. It's gonna be very crazy, and the tree, and I don't know, it's much more complex. So I will leave it to the next tutorial to show you something very interesting and much more complicated. Thanks for watching. See you in next tutorial.